sound of a single distant, mournful bell. Fades slightly. Then the rhythmic, unsettling creak of old wood, like a ship in a storm but confined, stagnant. A faint, dry rustling as if dust motes dance in ancient sunlight.
I was so
A
scared.
barely audible, sharp intake of breath, a suppressed sob caught deep in the throat. The air was a thick, unyielding shroud that day, heavy with the scent of unwashed bodies, stale fear, and the metallic tang of unspoken despair. It clung to the skin, seeped into the very pores, a suffocating presence that stole the oxygen from every gasp. What if the very core of your existence, the bright, beating heart of your love, could be ripped from you, not by an act of God, nor by the cruel hand of fate, but by the cold, calculating hand of man, all for a price? What if the sound of your child's laughter, the feel of their small hand in yours, the warmth of their breath against your neck, became not memories to cherish, but agonizing phantom limbs, forever aching with their absence? This is not a tale of what if, for some, but the stark, brutal reality for countless souls. This is the story of Eliza, and the day the world swallowed her son whole. Pause for breath. Speak slowly with gravitas. The dust, an omnipresent companion, swirled in lazy eddies around the rough-hewn planks of the auction block, a miniature whirlwind reflecting the turmoil raging in Eliza's chest. Each grain seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken prayers, a million shattered hopes. Her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen from a night spent battling the demons of foreboding, were fixed on the small, slight figure standing beside her. Josiah. 6 years old. 6 years of sunshine and scraped knees, of whispered secrets and unwavering trust. His hand, so small and soft, was clasped in hers, a desperate anchor in a sea of dread. She felt the delicate pulse fluttering beneath his skin, a fragile bird trapped in a cage. And she prayed, with a fervor that clawed at her throat, that his heart, unlike hers, would not be irrevocably broken this day. Voice trembles with emotion. Josiah, with his wide, curious eyes and a spirit as bright as the morning sun, sensed the change in the air. The usual warmth of his mother's touch was now a trembling current of raw fear. He looked up at her, his brow furrowed with a child's innocent confusion, a silent question in his gaze that pierced Eliza's soul like a shard of ice. "Mama, why are you sad?" She imagined him asking, and the thought alone was a fresh, searing wound. She couldn't speak. Words were luxuries she could not afford, weapons that would betray her terror, and she needed every ounce of her strength to keep her composure, to shield him, however futilely, from the impending storm. She squeezed his hand tighter, a silent promise, a desperate plea, a mother's futile attempt to absorb all the pain herself. The sounds of the marketplace, usually a cacophony of life, were distorted, grotesque. The raucous laughter of bidders, the sharp crack of the auctioneer's gavel in the distance, the lowing of cattle, the shrill cries of other children, it all blended into a single, discordant symphony of hell. Each sound was a hammer blow against the fragile fortress of her resolve. She tried to focus on Josiah, on the intricate pattern of the rough burlap of his worn breeches, on the way his short, dark curls framed his sweet face. She tried to etch every detail into her mind, to build an internal sanctuary where these images could reside, untouched by the coming desolation. Speak softly, slowly. Her own body felt alien, disconnected. Her legs were leaden, her stomach a churning vortex of acid, her breath shallow and uneven. The rough cotton of her dress, usually a familiar comfort, now felt like a scratchy shroud, binding her, suffocating her. She was acutely aware of the eyes upon them, the cold, appraising stares of men who saw not a mother and her child, but units of labor, commodities, property. Each gaze was a violation, stripping away her humanity, reducing her to a thing to be measured, valued, and then discarded. The humiliation was a burning ember in her gut, a shame that had nothing to do with her own actions, but everything to do with the monstrous injustice of her existence. She remembered the whisper of hope that had sustained her through so many arduous days. Hope, a flickering candle in the vast darkness, that somehow by some miracle she and Josiah would stay together. That Master Thorn, who was perhaps less cruel than others, would see the bond, the sanctity of their connection. Foolish hope. A naive prayer against the tide of avarice. She had seen it happen before countless times. Heard the cries, witnessed the empty stares, the broken spirits. But hope, like a stubborn weed, found purchase even in the barren soil of despair, until it was mercilessly uprooted. Pause. Voice slightly strained. The auctioneer's voice, sharp and predatory, cut through the din. Next up. Woman, strong hands, good breeder. And her boy, just 6 years, quick learner, healthy. His words were a physical assault, each syllable a lash. Good breeder. The dehumanizing epithet, reducing her to her biological function, stripping her of motherhood, of individuality, of love. Her boy. Not Josiah. Not her son. Just her boy, an appendage, an item bundled with the main lot. Eliza felt Josiah stir beside her, his small fingers tightening their grip. He understood more than she wanted to believe. He felt the tension, the fear, the unspoken dread. He looked up at her, his eyes now wide with a dawning terror. "Mama?" he whispered, his voice a fragile thread, barely audible above the rising clamor. "Mama, what's happening?" Long pause. "Speak very softly, close to a whisper." Her heart twisted, a searing pain that stole her breath. She knelt, ignoring the stares, ignoring the aching in her knees, pulling him close, burying her face in his sweet-smelling hair. She memorized the feel of his small body against hers, the comforting weight of his head on her shoulder, the faint, clean scent of his skin that still carried the memory of their small cabin and the river stones where they sometimes washed. "Nothing, my love," she murmured, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. Mama's just holding her boy. Mama's just loving her boy." She kissed the top of his head once, twice, 1,000 times in that single desperate moment, imprinting him onto her soul. Then a harsh hand on her shoulder. "Up, woman. Time to go." The world tilted. Her vision blurred. She rose slowly, reluctantly, Josiah still clinging to her skirt. A beat of silence. Then a sharp, metallic clang like a gavel hitting wood. The block. It loomed before them, a gallows for the living. Rough, splintered wood, stained with the invisible tears of countless others. She imagined the ghosts of those who had stood here, their silent screams echoing through the humid air. She imagined their empty eyes, their broken spirits. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she was about to join their ranks. They were pushed forward. The space around them suddenly seemed vast and empty, the crowd a faceless blur. Josiah stumbled, and Eliza caught him, holding him against her side as if to meld their flesh into one, to make them indivisible. The auctioneer, a corpulent man with a voice like thunder and eyes that held no glimmer of human kindness, began his spiel. He spoke of her youth, her strength, her capacity for bearing children. He spoke of Josiah's potential, his healthy frame, his future value. He spoke of them as if they were livestock, chattel, devoid of spirit, of hope, of blood. Eliza felt a coldness spread through her veins, a creeping numbness that began at her fingertips and crept inexorably towards her heart. It was a defense mechanism, a desperate attempt by her mind to protect itself from the overwhelming tsunami of pain. She tried to detach, to float above her body, to witness the scene as if it were happening to someone else. But Josiah's small hand in hers, still warm and vital, yanked her back to the horrifying reality. "Speak rapidly, breathlessly, then slow down dramatically." The bids began. A flurry of shouts, a sea of raised hands. Each number called out was a nail hammered into her coffin. $50. 100. 200 for the woman, 50 for the boy. The sums, so trivial in comparison to the lives they represented, felt like an insult, a degradation beyond measure. Her worth, her son's worth, reduced to mere currency. She saw a stout man in the front row, his face florid, his eyes calculating. He raised his hand, a confident, possessive gesture. 300. Then another, a younger man, sharp-suited, cold-eyed. 350. Eliza's gaze locked onto Josiah. He was trembling now, his lower lip quivering. He looked up at her, his big eyes glistening, reflecting the harsh light, reflecting her own terror. He knew. He understood. The unspoken truth, the unspeakable horror, had finally penetrated his innocent understanding. A small, guttural sob escaped him. Voice cracks. "Mama," he whimpered, a sound that would haunt her for the rest of her days. "Mama, don't let them." Those 3 words. They shattered the fragile shield she had built around her heart. The numbness evaporated, replaced by a volcanic eruption of anguish. A primal scream clawed its way up her throat, but it was trapped, strangled by the sheer force of her despair. She wanted to rage, to fight, to tear at the men who stood by, complicit in this atrocity. She wanted to fall to her knees and beg, to plead for mercy, for a shred of humanity. But she was paralyzed, bound by invisible chains as strong as any iron fetter. The bidding intensified. The shouts grew louder, more frantic. The auctioneer's voice was a triumphant roar. 400 for the woman. 400 for the pair. Do I hear more? Then a new voice. Sharp, clear from the back of the crowd. 450. For the boy alone. Pause. A long drawn-out silence. The sound of a single, sharp exhale. The world stopped. The cacophony of the market faded into a distant hum. Eliza's breath hitched. The boy alone. The words echoed in her mind, a death knell. Her blood ran cold, colder than any winter's night. Her grip on Josiah's hand spasmed, her fingers digging into his soft flesh. The auctioneer hesitated for a split second, a flicker of surprise in his beady eyes. This was unusual. Splitting a mother and a child was common, but usually the mother was sold first, then the children or vice versa, but rarely in the midst of a joint bid. But profit, always profit. $450 for the boy, he bellowed, adjusting his strategy in an instant. Any more for the woman? No one bid on her. The silence was deafening, a vacuum in which only her pounding heart existed. They wanted Josiah. And she, Eliza, was suddenly worthless. Unprofitable without her child. The new bidder, a man she hadn't noticed before, stepped forward from the shadows at the edge of the crowd. Tall, gaunt, dressed in fine but dusty clothes, with an air of cold authority. His eyes were like chips of flint, unreadable, devoid of emotion. He merely nodded, a curt, dismissive gesture. The auctioneer, sensing the end, raised his gavel. Eliza's eyes were fixed on it, mesmerized by its cruel ascent, its inevitable descent. Time stretched, elastic and agonizing. She wanted to scream, to yank Josiah away, to run until her lungs burst, until their feet bled, until they were free. But her limbs were lead, her will shattered. Voice cracks, almost a sob. Mama? Josiah's voice was a desperate shriek, raw and torn, as he finally understood the finality of what was happening. He threw his small arms around her waist, clinging to her with all his might, his face buried in her skirt. No, Mama. Please, no. The sound of his pure, unadulterated terror was a sound Eliza would carry with her to her grave, etched into the very fabric of her being. It was the sound of innocence being murdered, of a mother's heart being torn from her chest, piece by agonizing piece. The sharp, brutal crack of the gavel. Sold. To the gentleman for $450. The words reverberated through the square, through Eliza's very bones, shaking her to her core. Sold. Josiah was sold. Not to a local planter where she might have stolen glimpses or heard news, but to a man she had never seen before, a man from a different state, whose very presence spoke of distance, of an unbridgeable chasm. Before she could fully register the blow, rough hands were on her, prying Josiah's small, clutching fingers from her dress. He screamed, a sound that tore through her, tearing at the sinews of her heart. He struggled, a tiny, defiant warrior, kicking and flailing, desperately trying to return to her. Mama. Mama. A long, desperate wail in the voice, then silence. Eliza reached for him, her arms outstretched, her fingers grasping at empty air. Her voice was gone, a dry, rasping whisper trapped in her throat. She saw his face, contorted in fear and sorrow, his eyes wide and brimming with tears, calling out to her, a desperate plea that would forever echo in the chambers of her memory. She saw the new master, a man utterly indifferent to the raw agony unfolding before him, pull Josiah roughly away. The child's cries faded, became distant, became echoes in the empty space where her son had been. Speak slowly with deep sorrow. The world became a blur of pain, a swirling vortex of anguish. She tasted salt, the salt of her own tears, hot and bitter, mingling with the dust on her lips. She felt the coldness of the ground as her knees gave way, the rough texture of the dirt against her cheek. She was alone. Utterly, irrevocably alone. The silence that followed Josiah's departure was not a relief, but a deeper, more profound torment than any scream. It was the silence of a future unwritten, of a life severed, of a love torn asunder. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. Eliza moved through her existence like a ghost, a hollow vessel where a vibrant spirit once resided. The work was endless, backbreaking, but it offered a perverse kind of mercy, a physical exhaustion that sometimes mercifully dulled the sharper edges of her grief. She picked cotton until her fingers bled, hoed rows until her muscles screamed, cooked meals until she could no longer stand. Each task was performed mechanically, her body operating on a crude, instinctual level, devoid of joy, devoid of purpose beyond mere survival. Her internal landscape was a desolate wasteland. Memories of Josiah were both a torment and a lifeline. She saw him everywhere. In the flicker of firelight, she saw his bright, curious eyes. In the rustle of leaves, she heard his playful whispers. In the chill of the morning air, she felt the phantom weight of his small hand in hers. Each memory was a stab, a fresh incision into her wounded soul, yet she clung to them fiercely, desperately, for they were all that remained of him. To forget would be to lose him again, a second, more profound death. Voice becomes distant, reflective. She remembered the way he used to mimic the songs she sang while working, his small voice a hopeful counterpoint to her weary tunes. She remembered his excitement at finding a shiny pebble, a perfectly formed feather. She remembered the way he would nestle against her at night, his small body a warm comfort against the cold, unforgiving world. These were the treasures she hoarded, locked away in the deepest recesses of her mind, safe from the brutal realities that sought to erase them. The other enslaved people, her community in suffering, offered silent comfort. A knowing glance, a shared sigh, a hand on her shoulder. They understood. For many, the auction block was not a distant horror, but a recent, gaping wound or a constant, lurking threat. They knew the desolation, the despair, the way the world continued to turn even when your own had ceased to exist. They shared a common language of pain, a bond forged in the crucible of unimaginable cruelty. But even in this shared sorrow, Eliza felt a unique isolation. Josiah was not just her child. He was a piece of her very being. The cord that bound them had been violently severed, leaving an invisible scar that throbbed with a persistent ache. She learned to carry her grief like a secret burden, a silent companion that walked with her through every waking hour and haunted her dreams. Sleep, when it came, was rarely restorative. It was often a battlefield of nightmares, replaying the scene at the auction block, the cries, the terror, the receding image of his small, pleading face. Sometimes she would wake with a choked cry, her body drenched in sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs, the phantom sensation of Josiah's touch still lingering on her skin, only to vanish with the harsh light of dawn. Pause for breath. Voice lowers, more internal. There were moments, dark and suffocating, when she wished for oblivion. When the sheer weight of her sorrow felt too heavy to bear, when the prospect of another sunrise without Josiah was an unbearable torture. But something deep within her, a stubborn ember of defiance, refused to be extinguished. Was it the memory of Josiah's bright spirit? Was it the unspoken promise she had made to him, that no matter what, she would endure? Or was it simply the instinct for survival, deeply ingrained, a legacy of resilience passed down through generations of oppression? She didn't know. But she rose each morning, put one foot in front of the other, and faced the relentless march of another day. She never spoke of Josiah to her enslavers. To speak his name, to reveal the depth of her pain, would be to give them another weapon, another means to control her. Her grief was her own, a sacred space where no master could trespass. She learned to hide it, to bury it beneath a mask of quiet resignation, her eyes often distant, her movements economical. A slow, deliberate pace. The seasons turned. The brutal summer gave way to the crisp chill of autumn, then the biting cold of winter, and finally the gentle promise of spring. Each season brought its own pain, its own memories. The first fall harvest reminded her of Josiah's delight in finding plump persimmons. The winter snow brought back the image of his small footprints disappearing into the drifts. Spring, with its burst of new life, was perhaps the cruelest of all, mocking her barren heart with its vibrant, relentless growth. But with each turn of the season, something subtle began to shift within Eliza. The raw wound of her loss never healed, but it began to scar over, to toughen. The initial shock gave way to a deeper, more enduring form of grief, one that was less volatile, more integrated into the fabric of her being. She began to find a new kind of strength, a quiet resolve that had been forged in the fires of her anguish. She watched the other children on the plantation, those who had not yet been torn away from their mothers, and a faint, almost imperceptible warmth stirred within her. She sometimes offered a gentle word, a small kindness, a shared moment of silent understanding. In their eyes she saw the ghost of Josiah, and in their innocence she saw the enduring spirit that somehow, impossibly, persisted in a world that sought to crush it. She became, in her quiet way, a silent protector, a witness to their fragile lives, offering a glimmer of the comfort that she herself could no longer receive from her own child. Speak with growing intensity but still somber. This enduring pain, this indelible mark of the auction block, was not unique to Eliza. It was a common thread woven through the tapestry of Black experience in America. The separation of families, the casual cruelty of it, the systematic dehumanization. These were not isolated incidents, but the very pillars upon which the institution of slavery stood. The trauma of the auction block echoed through generations, leaving an inheritance of resilience, yes, but also an inheritance of unresolved grief, of phantom pains, of questions that could never truly be answered. How many mothers stood on that dusty block, their hearts shattering with each fall of the gavel? How many children were ripped from loving arms, sent to unknown fates in distant lands? The numbers are incalculable, the human cost immeasurable. This story, Eliza's story, is but one thread in a vast, heartbreaking narrative. It is the story of a system designed to destroy familial bonds, to render individuals as mere property, to deny the very essence of humanity. Yet, from this crucible of suffering, something remarkable emerged. A strength that defied logic. A spirit that refused to be broken. A collective memory that refused to be erased. The songs they sang in the fields, the stories they whispered in the slave quarters, the quiet acts of defiance, the clandestine learning, all were manifestations of a profound human will to survive, to preserve culture, to hold on to hope, however faint. Voice becomes strong, resonant. The echoes of the auction block still resonate today. Not as the physical clatter of a gavel, but as the lingering shadows of systemic injustice, the generational trauma of separation, the deep-seated yearning for recognition and repair. The fight for civil rights, the movements for social justice, the ongoing quest for equality, these are all, in part, responses to the profound injustices born from eras like Eliza's. They are the descendants of those stolen children, those broken families, demanding that the echoes be heard, the stories be told, and the lessons be learned. The strength that Eliza found, not to forget, but to endure in the face of unimaginable loss, is a testament to the indomitable spirit of a people. It is a strength that flowed into the next generation, and the next, shaping resilience, fostering community, inspiring activism. It is the quiet power to plant seeds of hope in barren ground, knowing that though you may not see the harvest, your children or your children's children might. Speak with renewed emotion but controlled. Eliza never saw Josiah again. Her hope, initially a fragile whisper, eventually solidified into a quiet acceptance of his absence, tempered by an unwavering belief that he was still out there, living, breathing, somewhere. She held on to the memory of his laughter, the warmth of his small hand, and the sound of his last desperate cry. Those memories became her sacred text, her personal testament to a love that even the auction block could not truly destroy. They were a reminder of what she had lost, yes, but also of what she had possessed. An unyielding, fierce, immeasurable love for her child. She lived out her days, a testament to the endurance of the human spirit. She watched other children grow, some her own, others not, always with a silent prayer for Josiah, a quiet hope that he too had found kindness, found strength, found a way to carry on. Her eyes, though often distant, sometimes held a flicker of ancient sorrow, a testament to the wound that never truly closed. But beneath that sorrow, lay an unyielding, quiet power, a wisdom forged in fire. Pause. Voice returns to the original, haunting tone. And so, we are left with her story and the stories of countless others. A stark reminder of humanity's capacity for both immense cruelty and unimaginable resilience. The auction block, a stage for the brutal theater of human commodification, stands as a monument to a past that must never be forgotten, a wound in the collective memory that still aches. Long pause. What does it mean for a society, for a people, to grapple with the echoes of such a history? What does it demand of us to remember the cries, to feel the pain, to acknowledge the raw, enduring power of a mother's severed love? And how do we, in our present, honor the profound, quiet strength of those who endured, who survived, who carried their broken hearts forward so that we might stand here today to tell their story? Fade out slowly with the lingering sound of the distant, mournful bell and the creak of old wood.